Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, politics, and policies that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and as always, my co-host, Derek Cohen. He's our Vice President of Policy at TPPF. Derek, how's everything going?
Not bad at all. Looking forward to discussing policies with you.
Policies, yes. Sorry, I have to get that right. The big question right now is, have you, all the conservatives, it's all the rage on social media right now. Have you recorded your anti-Bud Light video yet?
I have not, but only because if I to understand how these things are supposed to go, I need to go make a awfully large purchase of Bud Light.
Okay.
And then, shoot them up with or throw them off of a building or something. I never really understood the idea to boycott something that you weren't going to buy anyway by having to buy it in the first place.
See, that's my problem, is that I've been boycotting Bud Light for about 25 years. So I don't know.
You were doing it before it was cool.
Yeah, way before it was cool. Anyway.
I'm actually going to have to push back on that because the numbers don't work out. That would have put you right about the early 20s. I'm going to call nonsense that you were boycotting Bud Light.
Well, that's actually because I couldn't afford Bud Light when I was, when I first started out.
A natty guy, I see.
Exactly, natty Keystone, or wherever I can get a free beer. Actually, probably is more closer to. Anyway, if you don't know what we're talking about, just go out on the internet and look up Bud Light. You'll see for yourself. All right. Well, getting back to again the people, policies, and politics that do matter in Texas. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. We definitely want to hear from you. We love getting your feedback. We love getting your story ideas and subjects and things that you guys want to talk about. And so you can catch us on social media, on Twitter specifically. I'm at RealBphil on Twitter, and Derek is at Cohen at TPPF. I always forget that one. So Cohen at TPPF on Twitter. Give us your feedback, give us your constructive criticism, give us your show ideas, topics, things you want to hear about. We are happy to oblige there. Also, a couple other products that we love that we're putting out that we want to make sure that you're connected with all of the different things that we're doing here at TPPF and commenting on, particularly right now because there's so much going on in session. Our newsletter, our weekly newsletter that we put out, you can find it at texaspolicy.com/thepost. The Post is what that's called, and it's just sort of a comprehensive look at everything that's going on that TPPF is putting out. But also, especially right now, we started a video series at the beginning of session that we called The Layout, and it allowed members to come in and talk for 5 to 7, maybe sometimes 10 minutes specifically about their bills. We've now have almost 20 of those that are done, and some of the biggest bills, in fact, some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, we had the members come in and do their 5 to 7 minute talks about them. So those are really easy. If you want to get up to speed on kind of what those bills are, that's a really good place for you to do that. Again, that's on our YouTube channel. It's just search TPPF YouTube, and it's got its own playlist. And it's got all of them right there. That's called The Layout. So go and check that out. All right. So as always, we want to get right into the Ledgeland alert, Ledgeland updates from Derek and kind of what's going on under the dome. What are the top issues in your mind?
Well, you need to look no further than what happened immediately after we recorded last Thursday. Remember, we talked about anticipation of the floor battle for the budget. We talked about the DEI push in the Senate. And it was just, wow. I think we can look back and say that Thursday was quite a busy day. We did see a lot of contention on the floor, not only about the parental empowerment amendment that we saw that unfortunately attached, even though, as well as I do, much like in every year past, it's going to get stripped off. And it was a largely performative vote, one of which I believe we called the politics of which in the question last time. So we saw that. We saw the battle on the floor over the DEI amendment. We'll get talking a little bit more about that later on. And, over in the Senate, how surprised was I when I turned it on and it was like, oh, goodness, it was probably 8, 9 o'clock at night. And then one of the first witnesses to sit down was Dr. Ben Carson in support of the bill. And so it was really, I think it was really illustrative to kind of see the approach that people like Dr. Carson and other folks in support of that measure took versus kind of the screed of the undifferentiated left-wing blob, we'll say.
So budget was a huge issue last week. The one I want to get to right off the top, get your comments and thoughts on. Obviously, again, as I always say, this is TPBF, so every 7 minutes we have to talk about school choice.
Down from 9 minutes, if I recall.
But the Senate had their hearings and they passed SB 8. It's not a perfect bill, as we said, but it's a pretty good bill, and it's actually would be the largest school choice bill in their education savings accounts, the largest education savings account in the country, which would affect over 5.5 million kids if it were to pass. Now it's moved over to the House, where everybody expected that would be where the real debate, the real controversy, or the real back and forth would go. This Tuesday, so a couple days ago, the House Public Education Committee had their hearing on it. And so I always like to point out that that's the first time that House Pub Ed has had a hearing, a substantive hearing on school choice in 10 years. So even though nothing was voted out, just having the hearing itself was a big milestone. You watched that hearing. You went back and forth with a lot of folks, and certainly talked to all of our analysts here and the coalition and around the state that's putting this together and in support of it. So what was your takeaway from that committee hearing?
I was very impressed. I mean, first and foremost, I have to give the utmost credit to Chairman Buckley, who was able to keep that particular train running on time, because that is, when a topic is, contentious, and I mean, you needn't look farther than the registration page or the registration rolls, when interested groups were providing all sorts of witnesses with transportation there. That there were a lot of people that were good, that were in favor of it, a lot of people that were not in favor of it. But one thing I want to illustrate, and again, you mentioned SB 8, and on Tuesday, no analog of SB 8 was heard. These are all specifically the education savings account bills, all the ones that provide that kind of funding mechanism for parental empowerment, as opposed to the Parental Bill of Rights and things like that we saw in SB 8. But all that being said, is obviously you had contributions, one of the largest being that from Chairman Frank. And what you saw is, when it was laid out and when the public got to start weighing in on this, you saw parents and those people who really want to see the best for their children overwhelmingly take the side of those particular bills. And it was interesting, and what I really noted is that on the other side, the people that were speaking against it, obviously, look, of course, the superintendents who make $350,000 a year are going to come out. Remember that scene from Blazing Saddles where they said, they're going to come for our phony baloney jobs? It's one of those things where, but they don't even bother using the language of this is for the, we need to maintain the status quo for the children, because there's absolutely not a single leg to stand on with that. That being said, is obviously the focus is on education outcomes, on diversity, on getting people the most mobility within the education system. Those people were all for maintaining the status quo, talking about school systems as what need to be preserved in and of themselves, talking about, again, just kind of the institutional inertia. Those were all the folks on that were usually against the bill. Because, I mean, those talking points are getting pretty stale at this point.
Well, and that's what I was kind of jump into, is that, there's not even really the pretense that it's for the kids anymore. I mean, it really is just about the money. I mean, it seems like because this effort is so real this time, and that the potential for Texas to follow, state after state after state that keeps voting for new school choice programs. But I think today we just had North Dakota voted for school choice. A few weeks ago we had Arkansas that voted for school choice, and that's on top of already the 20-something states that already had choice programs. So now you've got this tremendous momentum, because there is that kind of momentum, in that sense that things are different this time around. That fear is coming out in some of the establishment educrats that that in fact, this bill is going to pass, and so they are very, very worried about the prospect of actually having to create a product or a service and cater to the people that they're actually supposed to be serving. And if they don't, the money will then go to someone else who will provide a better education for them. So it's not even really about the kids anymore. They're just flat out making the argument, you can't take away the money because we say you can't take away the money.
And I'll even look. I will. What is the opposite rhetorically of a straw man? An Iron Man.
There you go. Iron Man, concrete.
Exactly. So I'll even give them their due. If they say, look, compromising a predictable line of revenue into the system might compromise their ability to deliver on mandated service such as special education and things like that. I will give them that. But then, and here's the necessary cap, they never go to step 2 on that. They never say, okay, well, if that is the case, then somebody's providing that supplemental element for special ed or for any sort of special needs or for any, maybe even just, normal, maybe emotional needs that might be covered under this particular plan. These are what this is going to open it up to. And if this is the only game in town, in several places it is, I will give them that it's the only game in town. The public school user base as it is isn't going to disappear tomorrow. But what we see and what we've seen in states that have happened, where this has happened, especially states where they have a very broad application of, say, an ESA, is that the kids who need that supplemental instruction get that somewhere else. Still attend the school. The kids who need some sort of, kind of unique situation, whether it's voc ed or anything in that regard, get that somewhere else. And then still, actually do the academic instruction at the school. And it just turns out they never go to that next step and say, everyone's going to leave. And, the question that begs is why? Right. But
they never answer that question.
Yeah, but also it's but then the case is if that money's not available and the service is not being provided, then that kid who has whatever that special need might be then will not be taken care of. And so that's the way it would be under the status quo.
So in addition to just making the case that it's all about the money, the other thing I thought about the opposition is that sometimes some of their folks that stand up there say the quiet part out loud.
The mask slips a little.
Yeah, the mask slips a little bit, and I think it exposed for people who maybe weren't paying attention to this issue a couple of years ago, that part of the motivation for parents to get involved this time and to really start this movement is the fact that when they had issues with what was going on at schools, whether it's the materials or the lessons or what have you, or you're just not satisfied with the education your child's getting, when they would engage with principals and teachers, they were not getting the response that they had expected to get. They were not getting a willing partner, a willful partner in trying to help educate their child. And that's on display too as well. There were several individuals that stood up there and said some very demeaning, very offensive things.
I think you and I are thinking of the same one right now.
About parents. There were several, but there was one in particular that was highlighted. Somebody who gets up there and says, look, I like parents and all, but some of them are drug addicts, and they just can't be trusted to make decisions, take care of themselves, much less other kids, which, there's so many awful things to say about that. One is, because there are bad parents, so every single parent, that's not wealthy can send their kids wherever they want to or move wherever they want to. So because there are some other parents, every other parent shouldn't get choice. That's the number one thing. But then, how many awful teachers are getting arrested for doing awful, inappropriate things at schools? What does that mean?
Or superintendents.
Throughout the education industry. So then we should, every single teacher and every single principal should then get a bad rap as well. Anyway, the point is that there is clearly, right under the surface for a lot of folks in that industry, a poor opinion of parents and feeling like, they're the experts and they're the ones who should ultimately make all of the decisions rather than these, ignorant, drug addicted parents who don't know anything about education and can't take care of their own kids.
Yeah, and obviously you said demeaning, and that's, I think, is the best way of putting it. But I think it's an effort of class minimization. You don't want. The idea, the framework that they have erected to defend the public school system for the sake of the public school system alone. And again, this is not a screed against the public school system, because many, I would argue most in the state of Texas, are actually really good. That being said, is in order for that framework to hold, they would need to basically be the buttress against the unwashed masses who would take their kids and put them in some, new Gilead, Christian academy or something like that. And it's just not that way. The parents, and the funny thing is, you've seen this all across the nation in places that have done this. The parents that are most likely to take advantage of any sort of flexibility in, like, say, an ESA program are the ones who are already hyper plugged in as it is. Yeah, there are going to be bad parents out there. There are going to be parents that take their kids and, probably make a determination on their educational future that might be deleterious to that kid. But again, as the parent, that is what they have the right to do. We've seen, the track record going back decades that is the, an infinitesimally small minority of the cases. And to say that, well, since that exists maybe once or twice, then, no school choice for anyone. It's just, that right there is a straw man.
So let's get to brass tacks then. I mean, there was no vote at the time, and I'm sure they'll probably schedule one for next week. And then, of course, the bill, whatever bill ends up, or bills that end up coming out of the committee will then have to go to the floor. But did you see any shift? Did you see any movement at all? Did you see, any, now that the sides literally got to stand up and go, toe to toe in a public forum, did you see any movement at all, or anything that would suggest that that the forces for school choice are in the lead, or maybe the folks who want to block it made some progress as well?
No, I would honestly say I think we're still at a status quo ante from where we were previously. But like we've discussed before, I am very bullish on the prospects of school choice. The question mark will be on the what, but I am very bullish on the prospects of school choice happening. I will say one thing that I did appreciate, and again, public praise where due, is Representative Harrison seemed to be doing a yeoman's job getting the individuals, specifically the folks who were testifying against these bills, mostly based on the the financial element, or saying the horrible things that you mentioned, getting them on record. Basically, he was doing a very good job for a guy who's not a lawyer. Was doing a very good job of actually pulling out that one thread into the daylight and making sure it was established in that. And I think that there's a lot of folks who went home. Now, granted, this hearing went very late. I think it went until like 2:30 in the morning. So there are a lot of folks who are probably tired. But then again, there's a lot of folks who really let the mask slip and really kind of gave voice to maybe the private thoughts that they probably shouldn't have shared.
Another, so just to wrap that up, not sure on the timeline yet as of right now, but again, they will have to vote something out of committee at some point in the next, beginning probably of next week, and then of course that will shift to the floor, and there will be, more fireworks perhaps on the floor, because this is, the most important and certainly one of the most contentious issues this session. Another issue that is of probably just as high importance, particularly if you look at public opinion polls, and had a hearing last night that went, again, deep into the evening, is that on border security bills.
Right.
And so that was in front of the committee last night. There were a number of different border security bills. The two that I want to highlight and get your feedback on are the two that we've been talking about here. One is HB 20, which would create the Border Protection Unit. I mean, this is a response, just give you a quick bumper sticker version. This is a response to the fact that we just don't have enough resources at the border that are enforcing the laws down there. It's not just people coming across, but then there's all kind of lawlessness that's going on as a result, and these communities are getting overrun, and people are scared, and the lands are getting trampled, and all of that. And the federal government's not doing its job, and frankly, it isn't deploying enough resources. So this is a response by the state of Texas to say we've got an emergency down there, and we're going to do something. So that's HB 20, and then the other one is HB 1600, which would create a state offense used essentially for illegal immigration, which I guess I didn't know that wasn't already a state offense. But in making it a state offense, it obviously opens up new avenues for enforcement for folks, for law enforcement here in Texas. There were other bills that were debated last night. There were certainly some theatrics, and there was a lot of crazy things that were said. But what was your takeaway from that whole debate?
Well, if anybody's listening who wants to go take a stand against these border bills, I would say definitely do what happened yesterday. I think that was a great case study. One thing, when you want to get legislators' attention, the best thing you can do is take that microphone, belittle them, yell at them. And
so the witnesses or the people giving testimony were belittling the members?
Yeah, I'm going to call. And just so we're all clear, that's sarcasm. But yeah, and we saw it. Like, I mean, again, I understand that this is a charged issue, and I understand that even reasonable people on both sides can disagree on some of the mechanism. But especially when we talked about, now you mentioned those two bills. There's another one that established a border coordinating council that, of course, again, the undifferentiated left-wing blob was, rabidly against as well. But that was getting bipartisan reception. Representative Raymond, who is not a Republican, somebody got up there, and I think it was a gentleman from El Paso City Council, and basically just said, look, if you're for this bill, again, the coordinating council, if you're for the coordinating council, you're racist, you're xenophobic, you're all that. And he just said, stop. And then just started cutting back into him. He goes, look, this open border stuff is not working. And again, this is from a seasoned Democrat. And so that's what we saw. And then again, just the interest groups that we've seen. I didn't realize that there was an advocacy group for trans migrants, but there is. Took position on several of the bills.
And that actually doesn't surprise me, but
I mean, how many dimensions till we get to we're just describing one person though, and so it was one of these things where I thought it went very as typically as it could gone. Chairman Hunter really tried to keep it moving, because I mean, especially because 20 didn't open up till 10:30 for public testimony, and even Mark Morgan, former head of the Border Patrol, was given 2 minutes, a couple of questions, and moved along.
Good Lord.
But I mean, that shows. Look, being a subject matter expert, as Mr. Morgan certainly is, and any Joe Schmo off the street, they're given equal forum. And I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be the case, but it also means that when you are there to discuss a serious topic, because the general body of witnesses is getting, a very egalitarian treatment, again, where we'll let somebody up there with nose rings and purple hair get the same time the immediate past head of the Border Patrol gets.
Right.
You don't get to go up there and, again, belittle the members, yell at them, and do the little theatrics, and then turn around and wonder why nobody took anything that you had to say to heart. And so about those bills specifically, we've discussed, I think it was 2 episodes ago, about HB 20. That's going to be I forget.
The lightning rod.
Yeah, there was a tweet by a certain member who's known for, I would say, kind of cartoonish theatrics, who said that this was the Latinx lynch mob bill.
The vigilante was used a lot yesterday.
Exactly. And of course, they forget to mention that these individuals need to have both training and law enforcement experience and things like that. But let's not let facts get in the way of a good story.
Exactly.
And so you had all these accusations coming, and it gets, after you've watched for an hour, you get to the point where you're like, nobody in the opposition has done any of the research. And even some of the people that were for the bill or on the bill raised concerns with its implementation. That's what this is for.
Sure.
It is for discussing how the rubber is going to hit the road in this very serious, you mentioned earlier on, this has been the number one issue as long as we've been doing polling here in the state, except for, what was it, March, April, and May of 2020?
Right. So, since we've been doing polling at TBPF regularly, and this is going to get to my 2 major points on this, is that, number one, this has been the number one issue for all Texans, not for Republicans, not for conservatives, not for, one particular group, but for all Texans, including Democrats and independents, ever since we've been doing polling on this issue going back 3 or 4 years, except for a couple months right at the pandemic. And so, the legislature is stepping up. I give them a ton of credit for stepping into this because this is a difficult issue. There are a lot of constitutional issues because obviously immigration is predominantly a foreign or a national federal priority. So that's what I say about the second thing is, but that doesn't mean that Texas doesn't have authority to protect its communities, even if it is coming from illegal people, illegal aliens and others who are coming across illegally. Yes, that is a federal priority, or that is a federal responsibility, but we don't just have to stand back and let them take over our communities.
Well, you also mentioned the crime for illegal entry. The hole that patches is right now what they're essentially doing down at the border through Operation Lone Star, or just local law enforcement generally, is they're using criminal trespass as the analog offense, because obviously, if you are here in the country illegally and you're going across, if you look at the border, it's mostly farms and ranches, all on the one side of the river, outside of some very specific places, and those places usually have fences or walls. Then you are criminally trespassing. And, this is where we see all the damage and destruction that happens to these properties down there. This would actually make the presence a crime. So, in other words, if somebody did, or was arrested not necessarily at, while trespassing or on the property, because remember, there's a lot of, you got to patrol private property with public resources, and that creates a whole other, a whole other issue. So this gives an analog for that as well. Now, will this get challenged? It may, but I think that what we're going to see out of the Biden administration, especially with this particular secretary, who I doubt even knows that border's part of his particular portfolio, is that, look, if you are deliberately choosing not to enforce so much of this, or to have anything to do with any sort of the lawlessness down there, then you're going to have to see states basically innovating like this. And I think this is only probably the first barrage of that.
Taking matters into their own hands. And so I want to get to, there's been some movement on property tax. So I want to get there a little bit. But anything else, there's a ton that happened. There was, a lot of stuff that we like to focus on. There was, stuff on the energy grid. There was taxpayer-funded lobbying that passed through the Senate. There was grid reform. There was foster care reform, like really important foster care reform that was passed. Anything sort of under the radar there, or anything that should be more on the radar that you want to make sure we highlight?
Well, I can't really say it's under the radar, because they actually did a press conference on it today. But it kind of caught everyone surprised, because the lieutenant governor posted yesterday that there will be a press conference today, Thursday, at 10:30, and everyone's like, "Oh, here
property tax, here it
goes, another broadside at the house incoming," or him announcing that, okay, well, I know we said 16 billion, well, it's 20 billion now, or something like that. That's what everybody was expecting. Everyone was really surprised when he came out and talked about earmarking $3.2 billion towards basically state mental health services. Now, we've talked about mental health in a lot of capacities, but one thing that people don't understand, and this is actually a very serious issue, because it bleeds over into obviously healthcare, but really cogently into criminal justice as well, is kind of our bed capacity in our state hospitals. I can speak knowledgeably about ASH, Austin State Hospital, where its competency restoration backlog is just absolutely immense. And so this is basically, you know as well as me, because you are out here on the streets, walking to and from your car. We are not doing a great job with individuals and their mental health needs. I think we can all say, especially when those tend to be supplemented by substance abuse. And so if somebody was arrested for trespass, jaywalking, or whatever, and the defense counsel goes, "I'm not sure this guy is competent to stand trial," that starts this whole rigmarole. They put them in the institution to basically restore their competency and able to do that. The thing is, if that backlog's so big, they just back out onto the streets.
So then is the idea then with this announcement today that they're putting a ton more resources into, that some of that, of course, would go to loosening that backlog, or just providing more resources for mental health?
Not directly, no. Like it's not. It will, yes, definitely, but it's not targeted specifically for that. But it will, again, kind of bolster some of the people or some of the capacity for dealing with some of our more chronic and forensic populations. And this will be one of the things where, again, the Senate, people look at the Senate and say, oh, well, looks like you're just spending, that seems like a liberal cause, and I don't understand why the lieutenant governor, and he was there with Chairwoman Kolkhorst. Again, nobody's idea of a squishy Republican by any means.
Sure.
And say, I don't understand why they're out there trying to spend all this money. I got to tell you, this overflow cuts into our actual hospital capacity, the hospitals you and I go to, cuts into the prison system. So we're definitely paying for these folks in a way that is not going to remediate whatever their problems might be. Or should they actually get into the state hospital, again, it just becomes that black hole where, getting escape velocity to actually be able to have your competency restored in some of these cases. Again, just these massive resource sucks. And what this is trying to do is basically bolster that whole process to get people through onto recovery, whatever the case might be, because the current situation is just not tenable.
Well, it's a good segue into an issue that's not necessarily talking about the legislature, but it is talking about public safety, which wanted to highlight this week, just because it was, number one, it was a huge success, but number two, the pushback was very strange. Was that the DPS, and you'll have to take us through some more of the details of this issue. You know it way better than I do, but the idea is that the Department of Public Safety would take over a lot, or at least give the Austin Police Department a lot more support, because things are getting bad here in Austin. And so DPS stepped in, provided some more resources as a result of, and depending on how you look at this issue, was it the defunding the cops that happened the last couple of years? Is it just that, the Austin in general is deteriorating in terms of public safety? But DPS stepped in and had some fantastic results.
Yeah, and so, and this is the tough part where it comes to apportioning blame for the current situation that Austin is seeing. And I will say some of that competency and forensic backlogs, those are, that's not insignificant in there, but is it more than 15% of the overall problem? I'd be hard pressed to say it's more than that. But one thing that we saw, so obviously we saw the whole defund movement here, just like we saw it everywhere else. And to be honest with you, the pushback that engendered here so much, they ended up spending more on law enforcement than they ended up the year prior. Now, the problem was they cut academy classes, which then again, you got to understand, people join a career, they age in that career, and then they retire from it. And if you cut out a whole chunk at the beginning, that is going to have, that gap is going to persist for the next 20 years at that level. We can put in a lot of people with less experience. You can't really put in people with more unless you're hiring from other departments. But that black hole within the, you ever see those age demographic trees they use for the census? Think of that with just an empty space, and that's what we have for those academy classes. Right. There's that. There's, and I'm just going to be honest with you. There is for all but one member, there's a hostile city council towards the police. We do see the current administration under Mayor Watson is a little bit better than it was under Mayor Adler, and that's damning with faint praise. But it tends to just be this idea that, this thought that the police can't be all things to all people. Look, this is my academic area of study. I completely agree with that. But the one thing they need to be doing, and the one thing they need support in doing, is making sure they enforce the law. The getting cats out of trees stuff, got plenty of time for that other time. But this idea that they need to just be, mental health workers as the first resort never works. You need somebody with a gun. And so what they did here is they've been really supplementing the patrol, specifically some of the violent crime investigations, and some of the road patrol as well. And we were going over some of the stats beforehand. We're talking about hundreds of pounds of meth
taken off the street in the last 3 years, 2 weeks.
200 arrests, a great deal of which were felonies, hundreds of guns. These are things where it's like, if I knew that was the delta that was going unaddressed by current resourcing issues, I'd be the first down at City Hall going, let's double the police budget.
Right.
Because if this is the crime that's going unaddressed, then this is again, you never know how much crime is not being detected. Right. But if this is a natural experiment in that detection, then I think these results are shocking, but also gives credence to the actual decision by the governor to allow DPS to supplement APD.
Well, and for me, I just thought it was shocking that there were some voices that came out from the city council and other places, as the DPS is putting out, saying, look, these are the results of the last 3 weeks. And as you're saying, look, most people would look at that and say, oh my gosh, that's hundreds of pounds of meth.
Can we have some more troopers, please?
Yeah, can we get some more? Can we get some more people? Instead, the response from some folks in some corners was, oh, this is just cops being, targeting black and brown communities again, or this is just cops going back to the, being the way that they were before we had, the big reckoning when it comes to law enforcement and all that. When I'm looking at this thinking, no, this is guns off the street. These are criminals that are behind bars. And yes, some of it was traffic enforcement. But if you've been on the highways around Austin recently, we need a little bit more traffic enforcement. Drunk drivers and so on and so forth.
Mopac Autobahn.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a town where people like to go out and have a few beers, and sometimes they have a few more than they should, and they end up driving home, and that that can literally, and it does all the time, kill people. And so the fact that that DPS did this effort, for me, I think they should be revered. I think it sends the message that we do need to be investing more into these resources, and not the other way around, which is just it's a little shocking to me that people can look at that and get the completely wrong perspective on it.
And I just got to underline what you said about. I remember again another member of the undifferentiated left-wing blob saying that the communities will reject this occupation. I have not seen any evidence of that in much to the contrary.
No, absolutely not. Okay, so switching gears one more time. So I did want to go in depth. So we've talked a lot about things that have already happened or things that are kind of happening now. But one of the issues that is getting a lot of attention right now because it's going through one of the Senate committees, is this issue of tenure at universities. And while it may not necessarily be the sexiest issue, it's not property tax, it's not school choice. I think personally, this is just me talking here. I think that colleges and universities, with the success that the parent empowerment movement is having across the country at the K through 12 level, which is parents demanding that this service be provided and that it be a genuine service, and that they have control over where their education dollars go, and they expect that the education that their kids are getting be quality. That to me easily extends quickly up through higher education. And one of the issues that people are having is this idea of tenure, which is essentially, guaranteed employment for as long as you're there at the university. And the two sides on this it's very strange. Obviously on one side, we would look at this and say, well, if you're guaranteeing employment, what are you doing to ensure and evaluate that the professor is continuing to provide a quality service, for his students? Like, what are the accountability measures that are taken? And if you actually look at the accountability measures that they discuss, it's basically rubber stamps, especially at universities here in Texas, public universities here in Texas. They rubber stamp these jobs every 6 years or so. There's not really any accountability. There's been instances when there clearly should have been accountability, when a professor should have gotten fired. Instead, they just got demoted, and they're still teaching classes. So it is a problem. Tenure is a problem in the fact that, people are expecting to get, lifetime employment. I also just don't understand the argument. You're the academic. You take me through this. Apparently, being a college professor is the only industry in the entire world in which if you don't have guaranteed employment, suddenly your right to free speech is infringed. You no longer have a constitutional right to free speech. That's what we hear, that if you don't give professors tenure, then they won't be able to to be able to teach kids the way that they want to teach them, or teach them subject matters, or, teach them certain lessons the way that they want to teach them, which is all very strange to me. It's all very strange because that would suggest a couple of things. Number one, that the rest of us who are all at-will employees are constantly having our constitutional rights violated all the time for free speech.
We say on our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as we say on our podcast, which is very strange to me. I mean, obviously that's not the case, and people don't just lose all of their free speech constitutional rights just because they get employment somewhere. There are obviously things you can't say in the context of your employment because it's not appropriate, but that's not a free speech violation. Right. And the second thing is that the only way to guarantee their freedom of speech is is guaranteed employment, which is all very strange. You've worked in that world. You've been around it. Is this a real concern, or is this just basically them saying we don't ever want to get fired for anything we ever do, and so that's why we need tenure?
Well, allow me to start by recapitulating the entire defense of tenure as it was given in that particular hearing. It is, if you get rid of this, then we will no longer have academic freedom, and especially if we're researching, the intersection of race and crime or something, we can just be summarily fired. That is the entirety of the defense of tenure, and it's also based on sort of I would say a fictitious understanding of what tenure was, because again we're looking at tenure, you and me are looking at it in the modern university. In universities past, it was not only a sign of prestige, it basically was a way of, now did it redound to the kind of job protections that we're talking about? It was never as ironclad as has been negotiated in some of our universities today. That's for absolute sure. Mm-hmm. But it was also kind of a status marker on, your body of scholarship has reached a certain level. Therefore, you are no longer an assistant or associate professor. You are a full professor. You're just professor, right? Right. And so, not only would you get more leeway and leniency in what you got to research and publish on, but it was more that you had that background too. And now it's an exercise in bean counting. And I mean that seriously, is that most universities, and this is not exclusive to Texas by any means, but most universities, you go, okay, that department's pretty tough. That's like a 10 paper department. That would mean that you would have to have 10 papers published in a journal of a certain level of repute in order to make that. And then you can say, oh, that's more of a teaching school. That's probably like a 3. That's probably like a 3 paper one. And then if you even look at like my CV, I have a CV right now with peer-reviewed publications that are definitely beyond most of these teaching schools, and I haven't been in the academic game for a decade. Mm-hmm. And so that's what it was supposed to be. Now what it's come into is it creates sinecures, and a sinecure, as you know, is just a job that you basically don't have to do any work for. Right. And what I mean that is that some tenure, again, this is not all tenured faculty, but some tenured faculty will then, once they actually have that, will then reduce their load to the bare minimum of teaching and research if they're still researching or contributing to the body scholarship at all, and then just kind of again just kind of coast until they hit retirement, right? Or sometimes they don't retire.
So that's what I jump into, because that's, to me, that's where I think we're going to get people motivated to do something about this, because that speaks directly to the quality of the education that parents and students are paying for.
And I don't want to be too cynical about this, but you also know, I'm sure you've heard that the advancement of research happens one obituary at a time. This is what we're talking about here, is that you essentially get somebody who, they become ensconced in this particular area, and since everybody growing up, in order to get their paper cited, needed to cite Professor X, not the X-Men guy, but just like whatever professor it might be. And so now you have Professor Y and Z, whose predominant body of work is the same as Professor X, and they have to cite all that stuff. And again, it's this very slow iterative process that actually pushes against academic rigor and discovery. And so it's one of these things where it perverts every single incentive that these institutions are supposed to have. Right. They should be bold in what it is they seek to look at. They should be taking tough questions and looking at them. The idea that this would cancel someone's speech rights or any of that is complete nonsense. Because first of all, the people that are making this argument, now look, if you have somebody that's a hardcore conservative in the university saying, I'm worried about losing my job, I'd have time for that. But, universities, I think we can safely say, are not known as, these right-wing bastions of populism, where the minute somebody says something that's in the vein of a left-wing orthodoxy, then they get the axe. That just doesn't happen.
Right. It's the people that are complaining about it are the people that are probably the safest in terms of their political ideology. But you said something I wanted to highlight, is that the point of universities is supposed to be academic rigor, discovery, exploration, and learning. And this and tenure, at least to how it's practiced today, like you said, pushes directly against that. And
Right.
I think that's the part where, outside of, this academic discussion of tenure or free speech or even recruitment they talk about all the time is at the street level. Parents want to know, am I getting a good investment? Is this a good investment? Is my child going to go off and we're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars or however much it is, to educate my child? And then are they going to be getting that experience? It's not just are they going to be learning things that are in the book that they're reading, but are they getting the experience of discovery and academic rigor and exploration and real learning, and then being in an environment where you can have your own opinions or form your own ideas about things and then be able to bounce that off other people who disagree with you and have that experience.
Absolutely.
Instead, that's not what's going on, and tenure is a piece of the reason why it has changed.
And I'm going to add on to that. I'm going to say, we make no bones about it here. College is not for everyone. Your usual is education after K-12 for everyone, largely in some way, shape, or form. But that could be a trade, it could be a community college, it could be
A lot of people
whatever.
go pro right after high school.
Oh, pro academics. No. But no, I get exactly what you're saying. The thing is the accessibility of college, or I should say the accessibility, because college is very accessible these days. But the fact that we're all channeling these kids into this, that becomes this cookie cutter system. Again, it's a reinvigoration of our same arguments that we have against kind of the institutional inertia, or dare I say the lack thereof, that we see in the K-12 system. Again, we're making this cookie cutter mold that everyone needs to come here and needs to take X, Y, and Z general electives. You can major in underwater basket weaving, chemistry, criminology, whatever the case might be, and you get a substantive area there. But again, it's still forming this cookie cutter system. And again, going to the professors that teach. Now, luckily, I had a great faculty at the University of Cincinnati, and they were, it was also because they fought with each other a lot, but we were really,
which is good.
Yeah, and as graduate students, we were basically, given complete leave to find the one who you gel with the best and see if they want to be your dissertation advisor, and they can tell you to pound sand, or you can demonstrate some sort of value add where they'll provide this service for you. And that was really, that takes it from the mechanation, the mechanical going about the business of a department in academia, and really puts it on the student. And we had a lot of things. I don't need to go into all the the different separating wheat from chaff points that we had in graduate school. But we basically, the onus was on us to basically find the professor that we think we can create a body of scholarship with, and to work it out from there. Because no professor at the University of Cincinnati, which was, I think, third at the time when I was there, they didn't need anything from us. They have plenty of free labor in terms of other graduate students or undergraduate students. But we had to present a value add. And that is what really triggered kind of the learning renaissance, and really understanding how this particular element of criminology, or that element of criminology, or in my case statistics, really got the ball rolling when it came to advancing the scholarship.
And whether or not a professor had tenure didn't play into that at all.
No. In fact, I know several cases of folks who were in cohorts ahead of mine specifically, where some of the luminaries who were the field leading people when I was there were just second, third year out of grad school. Baby docs, as we'd call them, and they would partner up, and then from that partnership with a grad student and someone who was maybe a professor for only 2 years, they would actually create such a substantive body of scholarship that from that an actual body of theory could arise, and that's beautiful to see. And none of that happened with any protections of tenure. And look, I can talk on the grad student side, any protections that grad student's going to be funded either.
All right. Well, we've kind of come to a close. We're kind of running out of time, but we will keep an eye definitely on that issue. It's really just starting to bubble up, mostly in the Senate. We'll see what happens over in the House to see if they take on the tenure issue as well. But that is it for our time today. So we appreciate you as always. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And as we always like to say at the end of these episodes, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.